Welcome to Dr. Ishan Arya's Deep Dish Dialogues. Today we're going to dive into Australian residential colleges, specifically looking at their role, their vital role in student safety and well-being.
Yeah, it's a really important topic and one that definitely has quite a few different layers when you start looking at student support in universities generally.
Absolutely. There are varied views, of course. So our mission here is really to explore the actual support structures, the safety measures within these colleges based on the information available, the reports and analyses we've looked at.
Exactly. Trying to get a clear picture of what's intended and, well, what the sources say is actually happening on the ground in terms of support within that specific college environment.
Okay, so let's get started. One thing that kept coming up in the research is this idea of the student well-being paradox. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It really does. The basic idea is, universities are investing more in well-being, putting more resources in, but reports of psychological distress seem to be going up, not down.
Right. How does that work?
Well, there are a few key things flagged in the sources. That Origin report from 2017, for instance. It showed over half of uni students aged 16-25 reported high distress levels. And this was while efforts were ramping up.
So more effort, more reported distress. Seems backwards.
But one explanation is the awareness effect. It might not be that mental health is actually getting worse overall. It could be that reduced stigma and, better signposting to services mean more students are actually feeling able to report distress and seek help, which is actually a positive step.
Okay. So more visibility isn't necessarily a worsening problem. It could be better engagement with help.
Precisely. It's a really important distinction to make.
The sources also talk about an expectation gap. What's that about?
Yeah, that one's crucial too. So universities often promote their support services quite heavily. We're here for you, well-being is a priority.
Standard messaging, yeah.
But the gap opens up when a student's experience doesn't match that promise. Maybe they face long waits for counseling, or the type of support just doesn't quite fit their needs. That mismatch between the promise and the reality can actually intensify feelings of distress or disillusionment.
Right, like being told there's a safety net, but then feeling like it wasn't quite there when you needed it. That makes sense. And what about this overemphasis on individual resilience?
Well, teaching coping skills, mindfulness, that sort of thing, it's valuable, no doubt. But the sources suggest that if the focus is only on the individual coping without addressing the bigger picture.
Like workload or financial stress.
Exactly. Systemic stressors. If those aren't tackled, just telling students to be more resilient can make them feel like it's their fault if they're still struggling. It puts all the onus on them,
Okay, that provides some really important context for the whole student well-being picture. Let's narrow the focus now onto the universities themselves and specifically their responsibilities. What's their ethical role here?
Well, looking at the bigger picture, TQSA, that's the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, they're very clear. Universities have a responsibility to foster a safe, supportive learning environment. That includes providing adequate support services.
So it's embedded in their quality standards.
Definitely. And you also see sector-wide initiatives like Universities Australia's Real Talk framework. It shows a kind of collective acknowledgement and commitment to supporting student mental health.
But it sounds like there's still a debate about the best way to do that. Are things like well-being apps or workshops enough?
That's a key discussion point. Those kinds of short-term solutions, well, they can be helpful for raising awareness or offering some initial tools. But the question raised is whether they really address the deeper systemic issues.
You mean like how courses are taught or the assessment load?
Yes, exactly. Things like pedagogy, curriculum design. There's an argument that deeper reforms might be needed there to create a more fundamentally supportive academic experience rather than just adding support services around the edges.
Right. Okay, let's really zoom in now on the Australian residential colleges. They have a long history. And let's be frank, some have faced scrutiny over their culture in the past.
That's definitely something the sources acknowledge, and it's important context. There have been historical issues, problems with culture in some colleges, the St. Paul's College case, for instance, involving misconduct that led to expulsions and suspensions. That's a documented example of the kind of challenges that have quite rightly led to scrutiny about safety and inclusivity.
But the narrative seems to be shifting, that there's a real effort now to evolve.
Absolutely. What seems clear is that many residential colleges are actively working to adapt. They're trying to meet contemporary expectations around inclusivity, respect, and psychological safety.
So it's about changing to meet today's standards.
Yes, while also trying to maintain, the positive aspects of traditions, the strong sense of community, which can actually be really beneficial for student well-being. It's a balancing act, trying to keep the good bits while reforming the parts that need changing.
And a core part of that residential college model is usually some form of pastoral care, right? Dedicated support systems within the college itself.
That's fundamental. Even if the sources we looked at didn't detail every single program, the intent and structure are usually there. You typically have dedicated staff, often live-in staff, resident advisors or tutors who are senior students, maybe peer support networks.
So multiple layers of potential support.
Exactly. The aim is to provide that sense of belonging, make support readily accessible, offer guidance, basically, to foster an environment where students feel more connected and, crucially, safer. These programs and structures are key to that safer environment goal.
We should also briefly touch on international students. Our sources suggest they can face particular hurdles. How might colleges fit in there?
Yeah, international students often navigate extra challenges, cultural adjustments, maybe language barriers, difficulty accessing unfamiliar support systems.
It can be quite isolating.
It can, but this is where residential colleges, if they get it right, could play a really positive role by providing that built-in community, tailored support, culturally sensitive programs, perhaps. They have a real opportunity to help international students feel more connected and supported, easing that transition.
So wrapping this up a bit and thinking about you, the listener, navigating university, it's a whole mix of emotions and experiences, isn't it?
Definitely. Highs and lows.
And it's important to remember that support systems are there.
Yeah.
And specifically within Australian residential colleges, there's this active effort, these programs and pastoral care structures we've talked about, all aimed at creating safer, more supportive places for students.
Exactly. While that well-being paradox shows the complexities across the whole sector, the residential colleges themselves are often positioned as these sort of focused communities within the larger university. And they generally are equipped with specific programs and evolving pastoral care frameworks designed precisely to try and foster that safer, more supportive environment for their residents.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Considering these ongoing efforts in colleges and the broader university focus on well-being, how can you as a student best engage with those available supports? How can you actively use these systems to navigate your own university journey in a positive, healthy way?